Alright, what's going on everyone? The release of Modern Horizons 3 is nearly upon us, and with it comes 4 new Modern Challenger decks. Wait, what's that? Oh, they're Commander decks, right. Well, we have 4 new Commander decks, and the purpose of this video is to give brief overviews of the deck's core strategies so you can decide which deck is best for you. There will be links to the complete deck list in the description below. So let's start with Graveyard Overdrive, which is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, it's a Lurgoyf tribal deck, sort of. We could use more Lurgoyfs, but it's almost a Lurgoyf tribal deck. So Disa the Restless is the commander. It's a 5 mana 5/6 that says whenever a Lurgoyf card is put into your graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, you put it straight on the battlefield. So basically, if you discard or mill, it goes onto the battlefield. Then, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you make a Tarmogoyf token, which is kind of crazy. This is, it's Tarmogoyf, but it's a token. This card used to be $100 each when it was played in Modern, so that's just kind of funny. Anyway, the alternate commander is Corum the Undertaker, which gets +X/+0, where X is the greatest power in your graveyard. This is a self-mill deck, right? You want to mill something huge in the graveyard, and then he gets big. He forces everyone to mill when he attacks, so that, again, helps with the whole getting big. And he can play lands and cast spells from graveyards that were put there this turn. But let's be honest, we're all playing the Tarmogoyf commander, right? Either way, you're going to be self-milling a lot. That's the whole idea. So let's look at the self-mill cards. Not really. We're going to look at the Goyfs. We have Borrowgoyf, Pyrogoyf, and Polygoyf. All of these are brand new, and they all have power and toughness equal to the number of card types in all graveyards, +1 toughness. The Borrowgoyf will mill cards equal to the amount of combat damage it deals to players, and it returns a creature milled to your hand. Pyrogoyf says when it or another Lurgoyf enters, you deal damage to any target equal to its power. And then Polygoyf has Myriad, so it just duplicates itself when it attacks, right? It's a Tarmogoyf, sort of, that copies itself for each opponent. There's also Lurgoyf reprints like Lurgoyf Mordivore and Necrogoyf. The first is the literal OG Lurgoyf that started it all. I had one of these from Ice Age. I think technically it was a Deckmaster's edition because it was foil, but it was pretty fancy. Mordivore is a Goyf that can regenerate, and Necrogoyf forces discard every turn, and remember, your commander will return discarded Goyfs straight to the battlefield, so it's actually kind of a benefit. If only there were more Lurgoyfs in the deck. But you're probably wondering what else the deck has besides Lurgoyfs, and actually you're probably not, because the deck has Altar of the Goyf, Maskwood Nexus, and Tarmogoyf Nest. So the first gives your Goyfs trample and effectively doubles their power. It gives the Goyf mechanic, but it's gonna double with your other Goyfs, right? But it makes everything big. Maskwood Nexus turns all your non-Goyfs into Goyfs, and also makes changelings that are also Lurgoyfs, right? And Tarmogoyf Nest literally just makes Tarmogoyfs for 2 mana. You just get to play a Tarmogoyf every turn, so that's kind of fun. And in terms of non-Tarmogoyf cards, I'm getting the word Goyf is starting to sound really weird in my head now, but we have things like Stitcher Supplier, Sir Conrad, Dead Bridge Chant, right? The first mills 3 when it enters and when it dies, so 6 cards for 1 mana. Sir Conrad can mill for 2 mana, and he also damages everyone when you mill creatures. And then Dead Bridge Chant will mill 10 when you play it, and then starts returning stuff to the battlefield or to the hand at random. There's also more payoffs for milling. There's things like Brawn, Izoni Thousand-Eyed, Broodmaid Tyrant. The first will give all your creatures trample when it's in the graveyard. And there's also Anger 2, by the way, that does the same thing for haste. There's Izoni, which will create a bunch of insects based on how many creatures are in the graveyard, and then can sacrifice them for cards. And the Tyrant has Encore, so you can cast it from your graveyard. Encore is going to put a copy of the Tyrant for each opponent you have, and then each one of those is also going to make a token, so it's pretty cool. And there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. There's lots of new cards. There's more graveyard synergies. I'd like to show you some more Goyfs, but one of the problems with this deck is there's not very many of them, but there's planeswalkers, I guess, and people like those too. But anyway, if you want to play a sort of tribal Lurgoyf deck that's actually just like a Jund self-mill graveyard thing, check out Graveyard Overdrive. Next we have Creative Energy with Sataya Aetherflux Genius as the commander. He's a 4-mana 3/5 with Menace and Haste that says when he attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of a non-token creature. You have to sacrifice it at end of turn unless you pay energy, and you get 2 when you attack. The alternate commander is Kaith, Famed Mechanist, which is a 4-mana 3/3 with Fabricate 1. So you can either dish out a +1/+1 counter or make a 1/1 servo. She also gives other creatures Fabricate, so every creature you play is either going to put a counter out or make a servo, and then you can pay 2 and tap it to populate or proliferate. So make more servos or put more counters on all your servos. So both of these commanders are actually very aggressive. We had an energy deck recently, but this one is much more aggressively tuned. Sataya cares more about early game aggression, and he helps re-trigger enter the battlefield effects, and Kaith is more about going wide with tokens and pumping them with counters. Also note that Kaith proliferates energy counters, but basically this is an aggressive Jeskai energy deck. So some new cards that care about this aggressive energy strategy include Overclocked Electromancer, Razorfield Ripper, and Stone Idol Generator. The Electromancer lets you pay 3 energy for a +1/+1 counter, and when it attacks, it doubles its power. Then it generates energy equal to the amount of excess damage it deals to a creature. The Ripper generates an energy when it attacks, and then it gets +X/+X, where X is how much energy you have. And the artifact generates energy when you attack with creatures, so it rewards aggression. And that's per creature, by the way. If you attack with 5 creatures, you get 5 energy. And then it can use 6 energy to make 6 12s, which are pretty defensive, but I mean, the 12 toughness means they're gonna survive attacking a lot, and attacking is gonna generate more energy for more of them, so I think that's the idea. You could play defensively though if necessary. So normally I don't focus too much on the new cards, but I think WotC recognized that energy decks don't always have enough pieces in print, so they actually gave us a ton of great stuff. There are a lot of energy cards. We get like Salvation Colossus, Sphinx of Revelation, Blaster Hulk, right? More energy stuff. The Colossus is huge. It pumps your attackers and makes them indestructible. The Sphinx gives you energy when you gain life, and note that it has lifelink, so it makes energy when it attacks, and then you can spend energy for cards, so it's a card draw engine. And the Hulk has its cost reduced by how much energy you have spent or lost this turn. It's an 8/8 with haste. It makes 2 energy when it attacks, and then you can spend 8 to deal 8, divided as you choose. I could go on and on. Like I said, there are a lot of new energy cards, but let's move on. Let's move on to reprints. There are some traditional energy staples like Lightning Runner, Gonti's Ether Heart, Ether Squall Ancient. The Runner can convert energy into extra combat steps. The Heart can convert energy into an extra turn. And Leviathan is a pseudo board wipe on a very big stick that also generates 3 energy every turn for free. Some other noteworthy cards are Izzet Generatorium, Ether Refinery, and Scurry of Gremlins. The Generatorium is going to give you an extra energy whenever you make one, and whenever you spend energy, you can tap it to draw a card, so long as you've lost 4 or more. The Refinery doubles your energy output. You can also tap it to get 1 energy. It's going to be 2 technically, because it's going to double itself. And then you can make Etherborn creature tokens. And the Scurry of Gremlins makes a couple gremlins, but then you get an amount of energy equal to the number of creatures you control, which can be a ton. And then you can pay energy to pump your entire board and give them haste, which I think really emphasizes the aggressiveness of this deck. And yeah, there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. Tons of energy payoffs. Did I mention there's a bunch of great new cards for this archetype? And unlike the last energy deck, while there are some sort of like robot artifact payoffs, a lot of them generate a bunch of tokens because, again, it's all about aggression. Mere Battlesphere, for example, if you duplicate it with your commander, then it's a lot of tokens, right? So anyway, yeah, if you like the idea of Jeskai Energy and were unhappy with the amount of support it has gotten in the past, I mean, we've had 2 decks now that really fill out this archetype, I think. Next, we have Eldrazi Incursion with Ululek Fused Atrocity as the commander. This is a 5 mana 2/5 that says when you cast an Eldrazi, you can pay 2 to copy it. Sort of. You can technically copy all spells and abilities you control. This isn't relevant that much. Technically, there are some instant speed Eldrazi, so you can technically play a spell and then flash in a flash Eldrazi and then copy the spell. But basically, you're going to be using this to duplicate your Eldrazi +2 to the cost of your Eldrazi to double them. It's going to be pretty crazy considering Eldrazi are, well, they're kind of big. They're generally kind of big. The alternate commander is Azalask the Swelling Scourge, which is a 3 mana 2/2 that says when it or another colorless creature dies, you get an experience counter, and then you can pay Wooburg to give your creatures +X/+X, where X is your experience. It also gives Scions and Spawns Indestructible and Annihilator 1. And Scions and Spawns are sort of the bridge between these 2 commanders because Ululek likes to sacrifice them to duplicate big Eldrazi, and Azalask gets more experience when those Scions and Spawns are sacrificed to pump your board. But regardless, you're going to be playing 5-color, colorless Eldrazi. I know that doesn't make sense, but nothing about Eldrazi makes sense. So, some new Eldrazi that are exclusive to this deck include Chittering Dispatcher, Spawnbed Protector, Ulamog's Dreadsire. The first has Myriad and makes spawns when it dies, which can ramp into bigger Eldrazi or give you an army to pump with Azalask. I mean, this is potentially a ton of mana, right? You attack someone who's defenseless, you get 2 copies of it, the 2 copies die, and you get lots of mana. The Protector is just a solid 6/8 that returns an Eldrazi to your hand from your graveyard and creates 2 Eldrazi Scions every turn. And the Dreadsire is an example of what you're ramping into. It's a 10/10 that can tap to make 10/10s. And it has Vigilance, so you can attack with it and make the token later. And of course, with your commander, you can pay 2 and copy it, so you can have 2 of them, creating 2 10/10s per turn. That's the idea, right? Big Eldrazi. Lots of big Eldrazi. And there are a ton of huge Eldrazi, like Hideous Taskmaster, Benthic Anomaly, and Angelic Aberration. All of these are new, by the way. The first steals a creature from each opponent until end of turn and gives them Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1. So that can be kind of a pretty big blowout. Benthic Anomaly is an anomaly. It's a fair name. It creates a huge copy of one of your opponent's creatures. It's a little bit complicated because you choose 1 creature from each player, then you create a token copy of one of those, but that token gets the combined power and toughness of all 3. So you can pick 1 creature that has like abilities that you want, and then you just pick the biggest things and it combines into one absolute monstrosity, horrifying thing. And the Aberration lets you sacrifice all your Scions and Spawns and turns them into 4/4 angels with flying and vigilance, so it makes them bigger. And yeah, that's all of this is just horrifying. To help cast all these huge things, you get lots of ramp, right? You get like Ugin the Ineffable, Forsaken Monument, Eldrazi Temple. Ugin, it reduces the cost of all colorless spells by 2, in addition to making tokens and destroying permanents. The Monument effectively doubles your mana, since I believe 100% or maybe like 98% of your mana base taps for colorless, and the Eldrazi Temple taps for 2 when you cast Eldrazi. So all of this just helps you get to that big stuff really fast, and also helps you create token copies of all the really big things you cast. There's also tons of ways to make spawns and scions, like with Awakening Zone, Sifter of Skulls, Glaring Fleshraker. The enchantment makes a spawn every turn. The Sifter makes a scion every time one of your non-token creatures die. And the Fleshraker makes a spawn every time you cast a colorless spell, and also deals damage to all of your opponents when colorless creatures enter. And naturally, there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. Lots of huge Eldrazi, some very powerful Eldrazi support cards, And also, did I mention some big and powerful Eldrazi? So if you like the idea of playing a colorless 5-color deck that ramps into huge Lovecraftian monstrosities, be sure to check out Eldrazi Incursion. And our final deck is Tricky Terrain with Omo, Queen of Vesuva as the commander. It's a 3-mana 1/5 that says when it enters or when it attacks, you put an everything counter on a land and a creature, up to 1, so you can choose not to. So lands that have everything counters are every non-basic land type, and creatures with everything counters are every creature type. And I'll explain this in a bit, but first the alternate commander is Giotto Moog Ancient, which makes a 1/1 forest dryad for each time you've cast your commander, and then pumps land creatures. It gives them +X/+X, where X is Giotto's power, and note that the tokens it makes are land creatures, so at the very worst, it pumps its own tokens. So the deck cares about everything counters. It cares about land types. There's lots of really weird land type matters things, right? There's been lots of land decks, usually landfall and ramp, but this is land types matter. So some examples of this with new cards is Desert Warfare, Sage of the Maze, and March from Velis Vel. All of these are new cards and they all care about land types. Desert Warfare will return deserts to the battlefield when they go to the graveyard, but also generates a ton of tokens based on how many deserts you control, and your commander can turn lands into deserts. This Sage animates lands into XX creatures, where X is twice the number of gates you control, and your commander can turn your lands into gates. And with March, you choose a non-basic land type, then all lands of that type become copies of a creature you control, which of course is made easier with your commander. You can turn 4 or 5 lands into deserts, caves, gates, whatever, and then animate them. There's also a ton of new lands with non-basic types like Sunken Palace, Talon Gates of Madara, and Trench Post. The first is a cave that can duplicate spells and abilities by exiling cards from your graveyard. The second is a gate that can phase out a creature, and it can be played at instant speed, which is pretty weird. You can pay 4 mana and put it into play. And the Trench Post is a locust that mills based on how many locusts you control. Probably not a great win condition, but there's a lot of new lands in this deck. This is very land focused. A lot of the new cards are actually lands. So anyway, since this deck cares so much about lands, you'll also find plenty of ramp spells like Uro, Hour of Promise, Mana Reflection, all of which either help you get more lands or increase how much mana your lands produce. And then you have a lot of land payoffs, be it landfall cards like Scoot Swarm, Tadiova, and Seer's Sundial. Scoot Swarm, of course, makes tons of tokens, Tadiova draws, or there's big expensive spells that reward you for having a lot of mana, like Avenger of Zendikar, Apex Devastator, and Drown in Dreams, all of which can be pretty crazy in the late game, and there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. Lots of ramp payoffs, lots of powerful new cards, also some rather valuable lands. This deck has some pretty crazy lands for a precon, actually. I'm kind of surprised how expensive some of these lands are, but generally speaking, if you want to play a Simic land deck, which have existed before, but with an interesting new twist where land types matter, be sure to check out Tricky Terrain. And that's it for our Modern Horizons 3 Commander decks. I will leave links to the complete deck list in the description below, as well as sponsored Amazon affiliate links, which I discourage you from using if you have a local game store to support. Be sure to let me know which deck you are most interested in the comments below. It's probably no surprise that I like Eldrazi, but maybe you didn't know that. I kind of like the Eldrazi deck. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video was useful, and I will see you in the next one.